Hey, it's the second day at Bloodstock 2013. Somebody here loved it so much, he came back after playing last year to do interviews today. It's Erik from Watain. How's it going, man?
Fine, thank you. Good to be back.
I mean, you must love it here, coming back again for another year, not playing.
They're forcing me to. It has nothing to do with love whatsoever. Nah, but it's good. It's a good festival, you know. It's one of the few in the UK too, so yeah, it felt like a good thing to do. And the lineup yesterday was really good, so.
Well, it's nice that you've turned up and just supported the thing, like come here for King Diamond, and I'm guessing you watched like Hell, stuff like that today.
I actually missed out on Hell. I had my own private Hell this morning, but no, I watched Voivod and Accept and King Diamond yesterday, and that was like, I mean, those three bands in a row is pretty solid lineup.
Well, I mean, you guys aren't doing too bad yourselves. Like the Wild Hunt's coming out. Is it the 19th of August? Is it coming out?
Yeah, next week I think. I kind of lost track of time, but yes, any time now. Yeah.
I was quite impressed listening to that album. There's a sense of heaviness to it that the other albums didn't have, like this dynamic and this sort of underlying dark melody, like this malevolent feel. I mean, was this something you were going for to start with? Like, we just don't want to blast a record out, we want sort of, I suppose, like an orchestral feel almost, like in moods and timbres.
I mean, to be entirely honest, like, we always work in a pretty like intuitive way, you know. It's always very much about what happens there and then in the studio. But basically, we had a lot more time this time around. We had 4 months in the studio, which kind of allowed for a much more in-depth way of working, you know, much more creativity, much more like introspective work. You know, it was really a long process of getting to know ourselves again, you know. And well, it worked. I mean, to me, I like the way you put it about the sound of the album. And to me, it's like I think in the end we aimed for something that was going to be in between like a traditional, you know, diverse extreme metal album and just a really, really bad nightmare, you know, like something that was verging on the border of being something else than just a metal album. And yeah, we kind of pulled it off.
Yeah, I'd definitely say you achieved it. I mean, there's just this level of underlying threat to the whole thing, like from the intro all the way through. It was just compelling.
I'm glad to hear that.
I mean, is that the kind of, do you write in terms of what you think fans will want to hear, or is it just purely for you as a band?
I mean, one of the cornerstones of Watain has always been just focusing, you know, towards ourselves. Like we always work within the world of Watain, which is a pretty confined world, really. You know, it's a world that we built for ourselves, a world that by now has very high walls around it, so to say.
So like an insular sort of way of working.
Yeah, it's a very closed scenario, the whole composition process and so on, and that allows for a lot more genuine things to happen. You know, it allows for a lot more integrity, because I think what happens to a lot of bands when they get to a certain like level of success, so to call it, is that they end up, you know, losing a bit hold of who they are. You know, they get a bit too trapped up in this whole business thing, or, you know, and even more so the expectations of other people. And I think for us, it's always been very important not to do that. It's always been very important to actually neglect, you know, whatever people might be expecting and just rip our hearts out. And that's, you know, that's what we did on the Wild Hunt as well. And it's a very, very important thing for us to work like that.
No, absolutely, I totally understand that. I mean, I kind of liked as well that there wasn't really any news coming out of your camp while you were making this record. Like, it was just like, okay, the record's done, it's coming out. And that's kind of nice to get that level of mystique back with albums. Like, nowadays you get so many bands blogging and tweeting like, we're doing this today, and is it just me, or is that just lame?
I don't know. I mean, it's different ways of doing things, I suppose, you know. But with Watain, and I think with black metal in general, there is, you know, I think a certain level of silence and secrecy is necessary in order to really let the energies within the music grow and become potent and alive before you unleash them upon people, you know. And that's a way of doing that, you know, just like keeping everything very sealed off until it's actually time to do something. And yeah, it's just the way we like to do things, you know, keep it to ourselves as long as possible, and then when the time is right, light the dynamite. You know?
Well, you've certainly done that. I mean, it's a fantastic record, and that's not just in a cliched journalist way. Yeah, it's almost film-like, and it's sort of that level of depth that's gone into it. I mean, it's the only album, hand on heart, that I've just been listening to solidly for a month. It's fantastic.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, it took us a long time to get there. It took us 15 years to get to this album, you know, so it means the world to us and more, and I'm glad to see now, you know, at some point you kind of just have to let go of, you know, whatever people think about it. I mean, we've done our part now, but it's still, I have to admit that it's rewarding in a way to see that it's being well received, and it's being received in a very respectful way. You know, people actually seem to take the time it demands to get into it, and that's something that I genuinely appreciate, you know, from the listeners when they do that.
I mean, obviously this is coming out via Century Media. Was there there seemed to be a bit of an internet-based backlash? I mean, how much attention do you pay to things like that? You know, sort of, oh, they signed Century Media, blah, blah, blah.
Well, I mean, the label side of things have always been, I mean, of course it's an important aspect of the whole Watain thing. It has to be, since we're a rock band, but still I try always to not focus so much on that part whatsoever. I mean, that's the business side of it. It has very little to do with the actual creative aspect of things, you know. But one of the important things about the label situation now is that we're actually putting out the album ourselves on our own label, His Master's Noise, and Century Media are they're licensing the album. So it's actually like a split release, a collaboration between our label and Century Media, and that it's just one, you know, another step towards independence for us. Really, it's become increasingly important to, you know, make sure that you're in charge yourself, and make sure that, you know, there's no one above you. Really, you know, it's us who pull the strings in the end, and it's a very important thing for us. You know, especially in these days when there's so much attention towards the band and a lot of people want a piece of you from everywhere. You know, it's important to know that you're still the boss and that you're in charge.
Absolutely. I mean, how do you cope with that kind of thing now? I mean, you guys are pretty much, I mean, you're on the cover of magazines. You're a big deal now outside of the scene that you came from. I mean, how do you sort of compartmentalize that, you know?
It weaves pretty well into how we always lived. You know, the Watain world has always been a lot about contrasts, and I mean, all the festival and interview and press stuff aside, all the media attention and so on, all that aside, I mean, we live very secluded and solitary lives on the side of that. I mean, I live out in the middle of nowhere in Sweden, and, you know, that's a very, if it wasn't like that, I think it would have been kind of hard to deal with all this. But now when you know that there's always this like silent, desolate place to come back to, it kind of makes you able to do anything. You know?
I totally understand that. Just having that distance, that separation between the two. I mean, that must be important.
And I mean, we all live now in the same, not small but semi-small city in Sweden, Uppsala, and that place is really like it's a safe haven kind of, where, you know, there's a group of people that always meet, and that's our world, you know. And it's going to be interesting. Now we're going to do the first show for the Wild Hunt is going to be on the 24th of August in Uppsala. So it's going to be quite interesting to actually like invite people into that world, you know, because it's going to be kind of backwards in a way, but it's going to be good too. It makes the whole thing a lot more intimate and vulnerable almost, you know.
Well, good luck, sir, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.